Time to meet the king beyond the wall.
The Wildlings are the people who live north of the wall. The name Wildling is what the people who live south of the wall call them, and they would reject that name, which has its connotations of being uncivilized.
They're feral, and they fight incredibly well, and they're tough.
I like you, boy, but if you lie to me, I'll pull your guts out through your throat.
They are ruthless in some ways, and in some ways they are very connected because they need each other.
It's a harsh life. The winters are devastatingly cold. Food becomes very scarce.
They eat what they find, and they find what they eat.
Because of the harsh conditions under which they live, are a more primitive society than the people of the Seven Kingdoms. There's actually quite a lot of Westeros north of the wall. It's a large expanse of land, probably as large as Canada.
Things that have been reduced to legend and history in the southern world are living and breathing north of the wall, the giants being an obvious one.
First time you've seen a giant, Jon Snow.
And as you might expect, in any piece of land that large, there are different types of wildlings. They're not a unified people by any means.
The people who live near the coast make their armour out of oyster shells, and then we see Rattleshirt's gang. So there are different bits and pieces going on.
We felt that if you lived up there, you'd have to be quite organised, because they also move, so you would take your minimal amount of things. All those things were taken into account to try and bring something new to the look of the camp.
We wanted to not make it a vast military encampment, but also it's a community where families are travelling with the armies and the clans.
Women in the Wildling Society are seen as more equal than in the South. They're expected to fight like men.
What? Give it back!
Oh, I stole it. It's mine. You want it? Come steal it back.
As a wildling woman, I think you fight for what you want, and if you don't, you've then got to live this life, whether you've made that decision or not, so you've got to stand up for yourself.
We've made skin skirts, and some of it's fabric that we've waxed. It's not, fashion. And I just wanted to show that they were women, and if they all dress the same, you can't.
When we were on location yesterday, I saw one of the wildling women. She had a skirt, and I got really envious. I was like, I want to be feminine. Where's my long skirt?
With the wildlings, the general look on them is practicality. We've let the hair down, we've used braids and twists and things to take away from people's faces and stuff.
A lot of the wildlings raid south of the wall. They'll climb over the wall looking for valuables, gold. They steal women. Most of the iron and steel weapons they have are things that they've gotten by killing someone else and stealing their weaponry.
We've given the men large axes, spears, swords made from bone and a lot of antlers. With the women, a few more short swords and predominantly archery. The weapons are practical for this part of the world. We've wrapped it with leathers, we've wrapped it with fur, in keeping with the area.
How many men remain in Castle Black?
1,000.
Liar.
If you were a northerner, you grew up hearing these stories that the enemy are the wildlings. There's this endless war going on between those who live in the north and those who live beyond the wall.
I don't think the Wildlings essentially are fighting for anything. Beyond the wall, they're happy. This is their land, their free world.
The free folk call the people of the Seven Kingdoms kneelers because they recognize the superiority of a class of nobility. There are no nobles north of the wall. You don't become the king because your father was the king. There's no crown.
The idea that people would choose their own leader is a pretty enticing idea to people who are not in any line of succession and never will be.
Sometimes a charismatic leader will arise among the free folk, and Mance has done that. Mance has won the allegiance of the free folk.
You're Ned Stark's bastard. He's radical and dangerous, but in this world that we live in, everything's quite radical.
Mance is a wildling by birth, but he was captured as an infant by the Night's Watch, who they brought back and raised.
This was someone who struggled with his Night's Watch vows, someone who had problems with the way the Night's Watch did things.
So instead of being leader of the Night's Watch, he became a leader of the enemy, and a very dangerous enemy because he knows a great deal about the Night's Watch.
He's been trying to harness this army of all these different clans and tribes. He believes something massive is going to happen out there, and he wants to take them all back into the other side of the wall. You know how I got moon worshippers and cannibals and giants to march together in the same army?
No.
I told them we were all going to die if we don't get south.
Mance is perhaps the most dangerous king beyond the wall to arise for hundreds of years.
To do Mance Raider's tent and to do that whole world up there, we use huge mammoths that lurk up in the frozen north.
Carcasses of different animals that inhabit this environment, rope holds together.
All kinds of furs and animal hides, whalebone. Huge structures holding up the tent. You know, it's not just like a little army tent.
There's no trees here in our world, so we reflected that in the design also.
Wildlings grew up thinking of those south of the wall as being their enemies and vice versa, but the truth is the real enemy that's out there is capable of destroying all of them.
When the winter comes, it will be too dangerous or impossible to live beyond the wall, so they have to get through it, to get away from White Walkers.
When it's time, I'm going to light the biggest fire the North has ever seen.